My name is Paul, a proud, honest blue-collar guy, clocking in at 52 years old. Grew up with the belief that hard work and dedication were the keystones to a good, comfortable life. For the better part of my life, that belief held water. I spent years building up a successful car repair business right in the heart of Georgia. And I reckon I did well for myself. Owned a neat house in Fulton County, had a reliable circle of buddies. And at the end of the day, there was always a cold beer waiting in my fridge. Couldn't really ask for more. Then there's my wife, Shannon. We'd always joke how she was the brains and I was a brawn of our little duo. She graduated from the University of Georgia with the Bachelor of Science degree. A smart cookie. That one. Her passion for caring for others led her to become a nurse practitioner. And she's been serving at a nearby hospital ever since. Watching her dedication and commitment to her work was something that I admired deeply. She'd come home exhausted, yet there was always a satisfaction in her eyes, the kind you get when you know you've made a difference. We were young and full of dreams. When we set our I-dos 22 years ago, those first years, there was something filled with laughter, plans for the future. And they loved that felt as comfortable as an old one in pair of boots. We were joined at the hip, almost two kids against the world. I'd fix cars during the day. She'd heal folks. And at the end of the day, we'd come home to each other. Over the years, we built a stable and comfortable life, a life that I was damn proud of. She was my rock. And I like to believe I was hers. We were more than just a couple. We were a team. Well, as I would soon find out, our team was about to be dismantled. Our daily grind was like clockwork, a rhythm we fell into over the years. My day started early with the smell of engine oil and the sound of turning gears. I had my loyal crew at the shop, and together we breathed life into old jalopies and finicky luxury cars alike. Shannon's work started a bit later, but lasted long into the night, filled with the hum of hospital corridors and a gratitude of patients she aided. Despite the long hours, she had a kind of fire in her that kept her going. We had our differences, but we found common ground and hobbies. We both enjoyed gardening, hiking, and the occasional cooking battle in our humble kitchen. Our circle of friends was small but tight-knit, filled with folks from our community, fellow mechanics, hospital workers, and some old pals from college. Both of us knew that working hard was a means to an end. We were dreaming of a comfortable retirement where the days were long and the worries were few. We'd fantasize about finally getting that RV and setting off on a cross-country trip. Just the two of us exploring every nook and cranny of this beautiful country. To make that dream a reality, we were diligent about contributing to our 401k plans. Every month a chunk of our earnings would go towards it. I would put a chunk in mine and she would put a chunk of money in her 401k. We were practical folks and we knew that planning for the future was just as important as living in the present. Well, I had no idea that 401k was about to become a thorn in my side, and the future we were so eagerly planning was going to look vastly different than we imagined. I'll never forget that day as I was manning the booth for my repair shop. I saw one of Shannon's coworkers, Sue, walking over. She had a friendly face, always had a kind word or a funny anecdote from the hospital to share. That day she seemed a bit off, but I brushed it off as exhaustion from the long hospital shifts. We chatted about this and that, the weather, the fare, the latest hospital gossip. Then out of the blue, Sue mentioned something that made my heart rate rise instantly. She casually brought up a certain someone my wife had met at a conference, how they seemed to hit it off, how Shannon had been glowing since then. She must have seen the confusion on my face, quickly backpedaling, saying it was probably nothing, just a harmless crush, but I couldn't shake off what she said. The seed of doubt had been planted and like a bad weed, it was growing fast. Was my wife Shannon involved with someone else? Disbelief, confusion, and a kind of gut-wrenching turmoil started brewing inside me. The woman I spent half my life with, who I trusted, was now a question mark. It was like I was staring at a jigsaw puzzle with the piece missing. I started second-guessing everything she did, her late-night shifts, the unexplained absences, her newfound secrecy around her phone. But darn it, I didn't want to believe it. Not Shannon, not my wife, but this feeling wouldn't let me be. It was eating me up from the inside. Finally, I decided to confront her. On this day, we were in our backyard, tending to our rose bushes. As the nervousness set in, I asked her straight out about the guy from the conference. She was like, "What are you talking about?" I then told her, "Your coworker told me that you were a little too close with this person you were talking to at the conference, and you might have a crush on him." She got defensive right away and said she was lying. She has never gotten that angry about anything. After that, it was pure silence. I didn't stay in the garden with her. I left and didn't tell her where I was going. I drove around for a while, trying to gather my thoughts to figure out what was going on. Why would Sue come up to me and tell me that? But my wife said she was lying. After about an hour or so, I went back home and my wife was sitting on the couch on her phone. She didn't even greet me, which was really strange. Didn't even ask where I had gone. Was I all right? Nothing. The next morning, I went to my shop and talked to one of the managers that worked for me. He was a long-time employee and was about the same age as me. I opened up to him and told him how my wife reacted to her coworker's remark about her getting too close to a guy at a conference. He said that might be a red flag. He said most of the time, people who don't have anything to hide will usually try to find out why she said that, and being defensive right away isn't a good sign. The rest of my workday was horrible after he said that. I couldn't get it out of my mind, but I wasn't going to say anything else to my wife about it, but I wasn't done. I was going to be more observant to see if there was any truth to this. And I wasn't going to ask Sue again. Over the next few weeks, my wife's behavior started to shift a little bit. I didn't confront her about it. Ever since I asked her about the guy she met at the conference, she's been a tad bit distant. It's been 3 weeks since that day, and we haven't been intimate. The hobbies we shared came to a screeching halt. Fast forward 2 days, and I go to open the shop one morning and a woman greets me with an envelope and screams at me and tells me, "Tell your wife to stay the hell away from my husband." Man, you should have seen my face. I go in, I open the envelope immediately and boom, photos of my wife kissing another man, being intimate with this man in someone's house, pictures of my wife in her uniform sitting with this man at a park. Also inside was a phone number. Called it. It was a woman who just left. She apologized for screaming at me. She said she was angry at her husband. She informed me she hired a private investigator to follow her husband. They have 3 kids. She said, "I thought you should know what your wife was doing, man." I was devastated, angry, and heartbroken at the same time. My longtime employee came in about 20 minutes later, and I asked him to cover the shop for me today. And I left. I went home. My wife wasn't home. I made copies of everything that woman gave me. Once that was done, I packed a few bags and headed to the rental property my brother owns. Once I got settled in, I went to see a divorce lawyer. I didn't waste any time. I handed over the evidence I had and told the divorce attorney to file for divorce based on infidelity. And I told him I am going after everything. I could alimony her 401k, anything I could get alimony was a stretch. I believe she made almost $120,000 per year as a senior nurse practitioner. I didn't make that. Although I had my own business, my salary wasn't that high. Weeks went by with very little communication from my wife. But when she received those divorce papers, she was a totally different person, calling me names, telling me I didn't measure up anymore. A month and a half had passed by before the divorce hearing. And she was a hoot. Let me tell you, screaming at me in the courtroom, the bailiff had to calm her down. Well, the divorce didn't go her way. I ended up getting alimony in the amount of $900 per month for 9 years. And lo and behold, I took half of her 401k in the amount of $100,000. My salary was $60,000 per year. And she made double that. I will also get half of the equity of the house we own when it's sold. And I was lucky enough to keep the rental only because it was in a trust that my brother controlled. My ex-wife's AP got hammered in his divorce. As I was told, he had to pay $4,000 per month in alimony for 11 years. He lost the house and she gets part of his retirement. They were married for 24 years, but they have been together for 28 years. I would have gotten more from my ex-wife's 401k, but she took some of the money out, which was stupid. You never take out money from your 401k early. You will get hit with a 10% early withdrawal penalty, and subject to tax by the IRS. About 9 months after the divorce, we ended up selling the house and I got another $157,000. I am a little overweight, but I have started working out again and taking it one day at a time. My friends have been trying to set me up with dates. I am just not ready for that yet. Anyway, that's my story. I have been wanting to send my story to Tony for a while now. I am 35 and my ex-wife, Emily, is 30 as of the time I write this story. Emily and I had been married for more than 5 years and I loved her so much. The truth is, we go a long way back as we grew up in the same community and attended the same school at a particular point in our lives. I was way ahead of her in class, and though we weren't together like the typical high school lovers, we met when I was in my late 20s. We dated and broke up a couple of times, but in the end we realized we could not stay without each other because we were so deeply in love. I worked for a top construction company, and because of my busy schedule, I was barely at home to spend time with my ex-wife. She complained a couple of times, but she knew I was out there making money and trying to close deals so I could afford the kind of lifestyle she wanted. Emily was a remote worker. She worked from home, and her job kind of gave her enough time to do the things she liked, hang out with her friends, and she could even afford to put off her work for a couple of hours to watch her favorite television shows. But it was not so for me if I wasn't inspecting a particular site or trying to buy an old house for renovation. I was working on site, and by the time I came back home I would be so exhausted, and this went on for a while. I tried to make it up to Emily as much as I could during the weekend. We'd go out, just the two of us, jump on a mini vacation whenever we could, and I bought her expensive stuff just as my way to make up for my unavailability. She loved all of those things, and she understood that I was doing the most to make her happy. We didn't have a child yet because she said she was not ready to be a mom, and besides, she wanted me to make more money so our child could have the best life, get a good education, and not have to struggle as we did in the early stages of our lives. Though I tried to talk to her a lot of times about it. I even explained to her that they were people who were not earning as much as we did, but they had a comfortable family, and they were all happy. But she kept insisting that when the time was right, she would let me know, so I backed off. All along, I did not know that Emily was having an affair behind me, and she was so good at hiding it. It all began when I came home a bit early from work one day, and she was preparing to go to a meeting. She had her makeup on, wore a beautiful blue tight dress, released her blonde hair, and wore a pair of black heels. That did not look like an ideal meeting outfit to me, but I shook it off. When she returned home that evening, she was covered in a strong masculine cologne, and when I asked her about it, she said she hugged a couple of people after the meeting, and she could not tell where the cologne came from. I bought that too and let it slide. But she raised my suspicions when she declined our mini vacation just because she wanted to be a part of her girls' hangout, which could have been rescheduled, and she claimed she had more reunion meetings to attend. I understood that she was the treasurer of her class, but it just did not make any sense for her to turn down traveling with me for a school reunion meeting and her girls' hangout. She knew how much I worked my ass off, and she knew I was not going to be getting a long break anytime soon, and besides, it had been months since we spent quality time together. So, after she attended her meetings 3 times that week alone, I knew something was off, and I decided to find out. On that particular day, she said she was going on a girls' night out with her friends, but she would be sleeping at one of her friends' houses that night. I knew Emily was a social butterfly. She just wanted to be a part of everything, but my instincts told me she was lying. She showed no iota of concern about leaving me at home, despite knowing that I really wanted to be with her. The funny thing was, she spent the whole day picking out what to wear, and was more concerned about her looks than the outing itself, which was very unlike her. I had a backup phone, and I left it in her car while I pretended to see her off that evening. It was hard for me if I had to be sure I wasn't making things up in my head. Some minutes after she left, I phoned one of her friends and told her that I wanted to surprise Emily that night, and I asked where they'd be hanging out, but from the way she sounded confused on the phone, it was obvious there was no girls' night out, and Emily lied to me. A part of me wanted to let it slide, and another part of me needed to know what was going on. I followed my tracker, and it led me to a fancy restaurant far from her friend's house, where they were all supposed to meet up. I must say that stepping out of my car to see Emily cuddled and being fed by her high school sweetheart was stomach-wrecking for me that night. I recognized him instantly. He was a guy that went to the same high school as us. I knew she was up to something, but I was definitely not expecting to see her with David, of all people. Anyways, I did not create a scene, I just made sure she saw me, and I walked back to my car. The moment she saw me, she ran after me. But I drove off, and I was thinking she'd drive after me immediately, but she didn't. I got home before she did, and I didn't hesitate to throw her things out of the house. By the time she returned, she was a complete mess. Her eyelids were swollen from crying, and she tried to beg me to forgive her and give her a second chance, but that was the worst form of betrayal. I asked her to go back to David, and that's when she flipped and told me she was leaving anyway. She said I wasn't giving her attention, barely spent time with her, she didn't feel loved, and David was a better man than I was. She even told me she was pregnant for David, and she even wanted to do me a favor and tell me the child was mine. Unfortunately, I had enough for one night, so I asked her to give to David what belonged to David, and I threw her out. A couple of months later we divorced, and by then her baby bump was so visible. It didn't take long before David ghosted her, and she had to deal with the baby all by herself, pay for her rent, and do multiple jobs just to get things going. To even think that I never asked her to contribute to the rent or some of the bills at home. I paid all of them by myself and I never complained, yet she never appreciated any of that. It was her loss because I did all I could to treat her right and I was faithful. But I have moved on now, though it was hard, but I know I'm going to be open to being with someone better pretty soon. Obi, I agree with you. She had to give to David what belonged to him, and I'm glad you did not fall into the trap of giving her a second chance. And to think that she did not even show remorse and went ahead to compare you with her lover, that is pathetic. I understand that you loved her, but she didn't, because if she loved you, she would never want to hurt you or even get pregnant with another man's baby. As you said, it's the worst form of betrayal. Take some time to work on yourself and find peace with what happened. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's now get into our next story for today. Hello, I'm sharing this story because my ex-wife, April 26 female, messed up big time. When April and I got married, she swore that nothing was going to come between us, and I believed her. Our love was young, we had just been married, and it wasn't up to 2 years, though we dated for a few years before getting married. Because of our beliefs, our marriage was the kind of relationship where we did not get intimate before marriage, so after we got married, it was a lot of exploring for the both of us. The first few months of our marriage were awesome. We made love almost every day, and that's because I could not get enough of her. She was crazy about me and I was crazy about her too. And despite our busy work schedule, we always found ways to maximize our moments together. April worked part-time at a bakery, and I worked at a tech company. Right from when we met, she always told me how she wanted to work at a bakery and possibly own hers one day. I was the one who advised her to leave her job since it was not paying so much, and do the things she loved, and she listened. Because of her passion and consistency, after we got married, she was lucky to get a baking contract from one of her friends who needed her to bake and sell pastries every Tuesday. The contract was a juicy one and she took it. Before she got the contract, we used to spend more time together on Monday evenings talking about our day at work and the rest. But since selling at her friend's talk show was an every week thing, April and I became distant. It wasn't just about Monday nights anymore. She just changed and paid less attention to me. If she wasn't baking, she'd either be on her phone, or she was just not paying attention to me like she used to. Slowly, our intimacy reduced. She would always claim she was not in the mood, even when she knew how much I loved to make love to her. As if all of these were not enough, I noticed that April stayed out late on Monday nights, and if I asked her why, she'd say she went grocery shopping for the next day, and sometimes she would pick a fight with me over it. Funnily enough, whenever she returned from her grocery shopping by 10 p.m., she'd come home with a very small bag, and since I was familiar with her baking ingredients, I knew most of them did not need refilling as she claimed. At first, I tried to understand her because she returned from the bakery, where she worked by 6 p.m., and she did not have time during the day to go shopping, but when she began to stay out late several times on Monday nights, and would return with almost nothing in the bag, I knew something was wrong. It was more suspicious when she'd even come back and go straight to the bathroom with her phone, which she rarely did, then ignore me till the next day. It became more frustrating that I'd return home by 7 p.m., and she'd leave almost 30 minutes after, without a good reason, and would still stay out till 1 a.m. When I could not take it anymore, I hired a private investigator to follow her on her Monday nights. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. The PI returned with pictures of April and a man, whose name was Alex, and they'd hang out together until she drove back home. There were pictures of them kissing, hugging each other, kissing in the car, and even pictures of her going into his house. The PI followed her for 3 Mondays just to be sure. When he gave them to me, I was devastated. Our marriage was barely 2 years old, and she was already cheating on me. I was so pained and I could not believe what my eyes had seen. I wouldn't have imagined spending the rest of my life with someone else, but April ruined all of the vows we made to each other. I wanted to pay her back, and that's when I came up with the perfect plan. Her birthday was just around the corner, and coincidentally it was on a Monday too. Before I left to work on her birthday, I told her I would not return home early, but I would make it up to her during the weekend, and she agreed. Meanwhile, I already made preparations for a surprise party, and her friends and family were coming in with cakes, gifts, and drinks for her. That evening, we all went to my apartment by 8 p.m. I texted her about an hour earlier and apologized again, so she had no clue any of us were coming home. I had my house key, so accessing the house was easy. Everyone went in, the light was off, and there was loud music playing in the background, so she didn't hear us come in. My PI already informed me that she was home with Alex, so it was well planned, and everything turned out the way I wanted it to. Aside from the house being dark, the light in our room was on, and the door was partially closed. Her mom was the first to get to the door, and immediately, she opened it in a bid to surprise her. She stood at the entrance in shock, and the cake fell off her hands. Her sister screamed too, and her dad began to shout. April was caught red-handed on top of Alex, naked and pleasuring themselves. It all happened so fast, and before she could get up and cover herself, everyone had seen her. I acted surprised as well, but deep down I wasn't. I knew it wasn't the first time they were screwing each other. Her best friend Anna was there, and from the look on her face, she did not expect to see April like that. Anna tried to push people out of the corridor, but it was too late. Everyone came to take a peek at April and her lover. I pretended to be so hurt, and I punched Alex until I broke his nose. April's father tried to hold me down, but it wasn't working. April, on the other hand, was confused about who to beg or apologize to. She tried begging me and her parents at the same time, but her parents turned away in shame and left the house. I had to keep my act, so I threw both April and her lover out of the house, and the party was never held. Before her birthday, I had contacted a lawyer and my divorce papers were already on their way. When it was ready, April signed and we parted ways. As I expected, Alex ditched her. He just wanted a fling with her and did not think it would ruin her marriage. Her parents shut the door behind her too, but her best friend took her in for a while, though she was so disappointed. After our divorce, she showed up at my house and stalked me on social media, even after I blocked her. In the end, she got sent a restraining order to stay away from me and stay off my property. Though it was all planned, I still find it hard to get rid of the image of April sleeping with her lover on her matrimonial bed. I miss her most of the time, but I'm glad I learned the truth early. I have moved on now, but I'm not ready for anything serious, and I don't think I'll be anytime soon. April did a horrible thing to you, but even though you humiliated her, no man deserves to get that from his wife. I understand that you loved her so much and planned on spending the rest of your life with her, but you can consider this as a good riddance to a selfish woman. If you didn't find out, she probably would have cheated on you in the future, but I'm glad you found out early, and it was really smart of you to hire a private investigator. It's a good thing her parents were there. You don't have to explain anything to them, and she'll have to live with the disappointment for a very long time. Thank you for sharing your story with us. We are proud that you made the right decision. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. One quality I 40 admired in my wife 44 was her enthusiasm for holidays. She said whenever she gathered with others to celebrate, it felt warm, fuzzy, and magical. Easter was no exception. She loved dyeing eggs and taking the kids on Easter egg hunts. Even though our twins grew to be too old for Easter egg hunts, she maintained her holiday routine. In preparation for Easter, she collected and boiled our chickens' eggs, dyed them, usually with the help of our sons, and used them in the egg hunt for the younger kids at the church. Besides basically hosting the church event, she also planted a large combination of daffodils, crocus, and hyacinth seedlings. She had at least 200 flowers ready for sale 9 days before Easter. She transported them with her Econoline from the grow tent in the backyard to her selling spot on the corner by the supermarket. I helped her with this project every year, including last year's Easter holiday, when unbeknownst to me she met AP. There were no clues that she was communicating with another romantic partner. She would just so casually tell me she was talking to her mother. I did not get along with my MIL. She drove me crazy, but I tolerated her for my wife and children's sake. By this Easter, our twins were 15 years old, so they didn't exactly jump up to go to Grandma's house, thank goodness. I had a reason to stay home now. How could I have known I couldn't trust my wife when she told me she was talking to her mother or going to see her mother? On this Easter Sunday, my wife already had the eggs hidden for the children to find in the grass and trees behind the church. The teenagers wanted to stay home, and since my wife told me her mother was going to be at the church, probably close to my wife, I elected to stay home. About 30 minutes after my wife left, her mom called the house phone. I was a little concerned, so I answered it. It became clear that she never intended to join the Easter egg hunt this year. She was calling to see if my wife could come over after church to clip her toenails. I shuddered and hung up. Since I distinctly remembered her telling me her mother would be there, my hunch told me something was up. I let my teenagers stay home and went to the egg hunt. I spotted my wife standing alone, watching the children hunt for eggs. I walked over to her, and as soon as I greeted her, I saw panic in her eyes. She kept glancing at the church building, like she expected someone to come out any minute. She quickly asked me why I was there, but before I answered, she told me her mother would be back out from the restroom any minute, so I should go back home. I calmly and grudgingly told her that I already knew her mom wasn't here. Her face and neck turned red, and she started itching until she saw a man come out of the church and start heading towards us. She quickly told me the man headed our way was just a friend that wanted to date her, but she already told him she was married. I was confused and hardly had time to think before he asked me if I was the reason she ghosted him the past week. I said excuse me and then told him she was my wife and we were married for the past 19 years. He was immediately deflated and told me they'd been seeing each other for a year. I was taken aback. It felt like the wind was knocked out of me. She told me that wasn't true, and that he'd been harassing her to the point where she considered calling the police. I just looked at her like she was crazy, and asked how that could have been happening without me knowing. AP called her a liar, and demanded she tell me about their plans for the future. When she covered her face, he grabbed her wrist to move her hand, and without thinking, I pushed him in an attempt to stop him from touching her. This resulted in us fighting. I remember getting a few punches in before I blacked out. When I came to, the police were there, and many of the egg hunting children were gone, left in a hurry with their families because of the brawl. I was seen in an ambulance, and it was concluded I had a concussion. The police told me what I already found out. My wife was cheating on me. The word got around fast from people that went to our church, and she was pretty much shunned by all of them. As far as I know, she was practically banned from ever stepping foot in that church again. I couldn't imagine my wife willingly seeing a man, even planning a future with him, all behind my back. Felt like a nightmare. It came to light that he had a child from a previous marriage, who was present at the egg hunt that my wife invited them to. AP told me that he was ending things with her, as well, since he had no idea she was married. He mentioned that she begged him not to leave her, and said that she told him I was abusive, which was completely made up. It was disturbing to me how my wife could sabotage our entire family all by one idiotic decision. This was enough to end everything we had together as a family, and it broke my heart. The kids and I didn't deserve this. I read posts about this in the past, but since I never did anything to betray my wife's trust, discourage her or disappoint her, I never thought she would have a reason to cheat on me. I was just dumb for failing to realize this would happen to me. OP, I am so sorry you and your sons had to go through this. I want you to know it was absolutely no fault of yours. She lied about you being abusive to make it look like she was only doing what any other battered woman would do. Leave the bad man and find a new love. The only problem is she didn't leave you, and you didn't deserve to be left. She just found a new love, lied, and pretended everything was fine to your face. She tried to justify leaving her family after 19 years by portraying you as a bad spouse. You must realize that this happens to men who least expect it every day, so you aren't dumb for failing to realize her deception. Just stay strong for your sons, and remember that you can make the best of this life change. Stay hopeful and remain honest in your relationships. There are honest and good women out there who are looking for a respectable man. Get out there, be honest, and find as many things as you can to be passionate about. I wish you the best of luck in life. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I were chefs in a gourmet kitchen in New York City. We knew each other for 14 years and were married for 9. We enjoyed every day together, working nearly identical shifts at the restaurant. Ratatouille was our favorite movie because our hats were identical. A year after the movie, I actually adopted 2 pet rats as a joke for my wife. She loved them. She told me months later she didn't know she could get so attached to rodents. Anyway, our relationship was great and full of imagination and happy times. After our passed away, we decided to conceive. When we struggled to do so, we took it as a sign to adopt. Our daughter's first birthday with us was her 8th. She had some emotional challenges that we worked through together, through honesty and patience. It felt like our family was strong and united. So when I got a phone call from the police 2 years later, I was extremely confused. I was at the grocery store with my daughter, and as far as I knew, my wife was working a shift at restaurant. The police informed me that she was at the police station, unharmed, but they wanted to ask me some questions. I was a little unsettled, and my mind raced until I got there. With our daughter under my sister's watch, the police started asking me questions like, when did you find out what your wife was doing? And how long did you plot revenge against him? All I would ask repeatedly, what is going on? Where was my wife? What happened? I had no idea what they were talking about, and after about an hour and a half of interrogation, they believed me. They verified that I was at the grocery store at the time of the attack on AP in his own home, while my wife was there having sex with him. He was stabbed by an intruder while he was in bed with her. The culprit was covered from head to toe and fled the scene. My wife was the one that called 911. I was terrified. I started crying uncontrollably. My wife cheated on me and experienced this traumatic event. Then I felt relieved that I was recorded at a different place during the attack, being the dedicated father I was determined to be. As I shopped for groceries, my wife was cheating on me. I felt so stupid even though there was no way I could have known. Then the police told me this guy was in critical condition, and he was having an affair with more than 4 other women. My wife just happened to be there when someone else wanted revenge. They let me go, and I saw my wife waiting for me. She looked disturbed and restless. When she saw me, there was brief relief, followed by great sadness when she remembered she cheated on me. I walked right by her, refusing to speak. She followed me, crying and begging to talk about this. I told her we were over, and that I planned to start seeing other people immediately. I sarcastically told her she made an excellent choice for an affair partner, because he was very experienced. She admitted she was extremely stupid for sleeping with this guy, after they talked for about 2 months on a dating app, but that was all he would ever amount to in her life. She pretty much demanded that I forgive her because she was worth it, and we already spent so many happy years together. I told her she ruined everything, just before I slammed my car door and drove home. I called my parents and sister came over to help me through this time, and try to make our home environment happy for my daughter. Within 24 hours, I filed for divorce. She tried to come home that same day, and got into a fight with my parents when they refused to let her in. After some screaming, they actually managed to convince her to leave with just a few suitcases of her belongings. When our daughter saw her again, she told her she was very disappointed in her. Can you imagine that? Hearing that your 10-year-old adopted daughter is disappointed in you. After all we went through to adopt her, and work through her emotional trauma, my wife let her down and made her a little less hopeful. That was enough punishment in itself, but my wife was obviously divorced by me, so she lost her home, and then she was also fired from the restaurant. I told our boss that we worked for the past 12 years what happened, and how our relationship ended in the worst way possible. She lied to me that day she didn't have a shift to work. They decided this made her untrustworthy, and fired her for it. She was so deflated and disappointed in her life's new path, that she didn't fight for her job, she just accepted it. She's still living at her parents' without a job or plans for the future. My daughter and I have been quite the opposite, just hopeful and keeping ourselves busy. Besides work and school, we go hiking, camping, sailing, and travel to fun destinations. OP, I don't understand how your wife didn't think of her husband or daughter before doing this, and stop dead in her tracks. I'm surprised every time I hear one of these stories that the spouse failed to have a moment of clarity, where they decide not to destroy everything they built with a person they claim to love. It's hard to believe these cheaters even have normal emotions, or might have understand what a relationship entails. They blow it, and once the trust and loyalty is gone, it's nearly impossible to recover. Things are never as they were before it happened, and it's always better to end the relationship. The emotional torment of staying together doesn't compare to the temporary adjustment of separation. At least in separation, there's newfound hope in the future. Instead of worry and paranoia, I believe that you made all the right decisions, given your circumstances, and wish nothing but the best for you and your daughter. You're an inspiration to us all. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Before my wife, 32, and I, 35, got married when we were in our 20s, she had trouble cutting ties with a long-distance boyfriend she dated for 4 years. She never told me where he lived, but she did tell me he lived 5 hours away. During our dating phase, I told her to choose who she wanted to build a life with. I left her alone for a few days, and she showed up at my house, appearing cleansed and pure of heart. She said goodbye to him for real and blocked him on all platforms. She was ready to take this next step into adulthood and responsibility by committing herself to me. I was pleased, but even after she did this, I still waited 2 years before proposing. A little before our wedding, she got kinda antsy, but she disguised it as healthy anticipation. After we were married, she seemed much more at ease, like she finally moved on and was settling into her new life. A whole year after we were married, she started friendships and daily communication with her coworkers. Our marriage was wonderful for years, but I didn't know that for much of the time she was talking to her ex again. Another thing I should have looked into a little more was how my wife begged me for money. I didn't know it, but she was paying some of AP's bills and buying him things. Our utility bills were barely paid down enough to avoid shutting off. I checked her phone one morning when she forgot it on the way to work. She came back for it, but by then I saw and copied all I needed to. I scrolled back far enough on their messages to find where she tried to keep it strictly friends. She said she missed him so much, and thought about him every day. She couldn't resist a little bit of harmless communication. It started as her just wanting to know what he did each day, and then how his dating life was going. They gradually became more and more flirty, and throughout all their messages, she never once mentioned she was married. I wanted to throw up. She was trying to stay strictly friends with an ex-boyfriend, but wouldn't tell him about me, and failed to tell me about her friendship with him. In the most recent text, she said she needed to see him again, and started talking about having reunion sex. He was thrilled. I worked up the nerve to tell her in her face that we were over, and she needed to get out, but before I could say it, she started telling me a story. It was a giant lie about an upcoming work trip in Altoona. I swallowed all the courage and confrontation. I was prepared to dish out, and pretended to support her. I knew she was going to visit AP, but the time she was gone would be the perfect time to change the locks, get out her stuff, and file for divorce without her being around to freak out. Little did I know that karma wasn't done with her yet. I kissed her goodbye, and she left for 3 days. On the 4th day, I anticipated the breakup call I was going to make, informing her that I knew everything had proof, filed for divorce, and if she tried to come back on my property, the cops would be called. Before I could dial her number, she called me. She said she was stuck on the side of the highway, 3 hours from our house, and way off course from where she told me she was going for her work trip. This was Rich. I pretended to be concerned and confused about her location, and she couldn't make up anything believable. She just said she was misinformed when she told me where the conference was going to be. I played with her nervous emotions a little more before telling her I knew she was a cheating skank, and I had all the proof I needed from her cell phone. She sucked in air so hard I thought she would pull the phone in. Just like that, her world became big and scary. She was sitting alone on the side of the highway before she could complete her cheating scheme, and now she had to face the reality that she didn't have a home to return to. I told her I only let her go on the trip without telling her I knew the truth, so I got the chance to file for divorce and get a leg up on dumping her. She was terrified and didn't know what to say. I told her if she tried bugging me or starting rumors, I'd share what she'd done with the whole town. So I hung up on her, and she texted me a few times, begging me to let her come back to get her stuff and maybe let us talk this out. Since I didn't reply, she called AP. He did come to rescue her, but she lied to him too about where she lived. She told him she was living with a roommate right around the area where she broke down on the highway. So he asked why she couldn't get her to help. My wife had a meltdown and told him she was actually married, and now about to be divorced because I found out about them. I imagine he was shocked and frustrated. but he allowed her to live with him for 5 months. By that time he had already cheated on her, and when he realized not even that would make her go, he told her she was a mistake and needed to leave. Of course, even without my help, her family and friends found out we divorced. She was gone for 5 months without saying goodbye to anyone. I think she ended up finding some desperate person looking for a roommate because they couldn't afford the rent on their trailer. She had to pick somewhere close because she never got her car fully repaired after AP's rescue. I don't know where she's going in life, but I've remained hopeful and grateful and found lots of support from people I least expected. Even my ex's parents expressed their apologies and sent me nice things in the mail. Wow, OP, you remained focused and knew right away you needed to separate from this woman. Letting someone live with you after discovering their infidelity is a huge mistake. It's lucky that your wife made up a lie right when you needed the opportunity to leave her. I think karma was already in effect as a positive result for you and undesirable consequences for her. She proved she wasn't ready to let go of her ex and was too immature for marriage. There are lots of people out there who should not be trying to date anyone because they haven't grown up themselves. Some people have no idea who they even are before they try to start molding to another person. It's impossible to know who you should be with if you don't know what makes you tick. I think if your wife would have taken the time to be independent and decide the course of her life, she wouldn't have been so uncertain. Thank you for sharing your story. You handled this very well. Now let's get into our second story for today. I always thought it was a good thing that I, 29, let my wife, 25, befriend guys. I trusted her and she always let me check her phone whenever I wanted. Because of that, I didn't check it at all, really. I knew she was friends with a guy we'll call AP. She never told me she was going out with him specifically, she just said friends. A lot of nights I'd go with her and see her interact with AP among other friends. It looked natural and guilt-free. Even though the guy was an obnoxious idiot, they didn't look nervous or flirtatious or anything. Now I know that on nights I didn't go with her, she was seeing him alone. I never would have thought my nice, sweet, charismatic wife would be romantically interested in this butthole. Most nights, when we were out with him and other friends, he wouldn't pay for himself. He never offered to treat the group to drinks, even though the rest of us did it every once in a while. I was starting to see him as the least desirable of all my wife's friends. That's why it was so much worse when I arrived home one day to find him walking out of my house with my wife. I blew up on them asking why he was here. He started stammering and acting like the idiot he always was. My wife figured the best way to handle it was to pretend he was only there to casually hang out and play pool. She didn't expect me to leave them both standing there and go check downstairs for evidence. She followed right behind me through the house, and as I got closer to the basement, she started pulling on my shirt. I found her clothes on the pool table, along with a towel laid down to keep the table clean. I kicked her out. I didn't wait, debate, argue, or think twice about it. The evidence was there. She cried and tried to negotiate an arrangement so that she could keep sleeping in the house each night. I told her no repeatedly until she took some of her stuff and left for stupid AP's house. As I grieved and contacted my mom and family for support, fate wanted to give me one more tragedy to deal with. 1 week later, my mom passed away. It was a really terrible time for me, but even during this time I didn't consider reaching out to my ex. I only communicated with family and really close friends. They helped me plan her funeral, and when the day came, the last people I would have expected to see there were my wife or her AP. Yet, there they were, walking over to me like they were the greatest thing to ever happen. I couldn't believe my wife's innocent and happy demeanor, like she had no idea her being there would bother me. On the other hand, I could totally understand AP's cocky expression. I was sure the expression on my face told them they weren't welcome, but AP actually had the nerve to mock me at my mother's funeral. He said my mom wasn't the only thing I lost this week. I saw red spreading in from the corners of my vision, and everything got a little blurry. I remember feeling my arm wind up on its own just before the knockout punch. He landed flat on the ground and everyone gasped. I took the opportunity to announce my wife's affair, and the reason for our divorce. Nobody wasted any time in throwing insults at her and demanding that she leave. When she hesitated to leave, people started telling her to shoo and waving their scarves or coats at her like an animal. I walked away and was supported physically and emotionally by friends and family for the rest of the day. She started screaming in frustration for AP to wake up and come with her. He finally did, and they were led away by security. From then on, my wife's social life was over. Everyone she knew thought she was gross and scandalous. Idiotic AP started believing she would cheat on him, so he left her. Maybe he got a little wiser because of all this. After the divorce was final, my ex was admitted to a mental institution to try to get a handle on her extreme depression and remorse. She felt like she didn't know who she was, and she apologized to me at least once a month. It was hard for her to forgive herself, but I just don't understand how she couldn't see it was wrong to begin with. OP. I am glad you had your family and friends for support over the loss of your mom, and then also your wife. It's completely unfair that you had to face the truth of her infidelity at a time when people most rely on their spouses for support. It's surprising to me that she had the nerve or stupidity to show up to the funeral with AP. That's probably the worst thing she could have done. And then AP completely disrespects and insults you. You had every right to react the way you did. He way overstepped the boundaries of respect and basic human decency. You did the right thing by investigating what she told you and following through with kicking her out. I'm glad her actions provided her with consequences, and even the idiotic AP left her. Hopefully, she gets the opportunity to heal and improve her life, thereby sparing others heartbreak. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. The history of what I caught my wife doing is this: my wife and I have been married for 7 years now, been together for 10 years. She works as an assistant manager at a fast food restaurant while I work at a big tech firm. We met through her cousin when they were both in high school together, who introduced us to each other. She was dating another guy at the time, but they broke up shortly after she met me. Being shy back then, it took some time before she began to trust me enough so that we could date each other. We only dated for about 3 months before our relationship progressed into a full relationship. That's until she graduated. She left to go back to school for a course. When she had the time, she would come down to see me during her breaks and holidays. Back then, I lived with my parents until we got married 2 years later. The marriage went well until about 3 years ago, when both of us got caught up at work with long hours. It really took a toll on our relationship, knowing that we hardly had any quality time together like before. Well, as the days go by, we really try to make time for one another, trying to do date nights or whatever, but I started to notice she was a tad bit distant, not as affectionate, and on her phone a lot, so I started to pay more attention to how she was interacting with her phone. I noticed she was texting a lot. I mean, every time we were together, she was sending a text to someone. While we were dating, she really didn't text much now. It seems she is doing it all the time. I caught her last night. She was in the shower and I caught a glimpse of a text that really caught my attention. When she got out of the shower, well, let's just say I kept asking her questions about what's going on. She broke down and confessed it all to me. She said he was an old friend from high school who recently moved back into town. They have been talking since they were teenagers, but nothing ever happened between them until now. Keep in mind, this is just the first guy she was talking to. Remember, she was talking to 5 guys. He was just the first one I caught her chatting with, so I flat out told her I won't stay married to her if she wants to talk to other men. I told her it's disrespectful and I won't stand for it. Well, she apologized and said she would stop talking to him. I told her you need to tell him that you're a married woman and she shouldn't be talking to him. Well, another 2 weeks go by and guess what? I caught her talking to another guy. I couldn't believe it. She told me to my face she wouldn't do it again. And here she is doing it again and talking to another guy. I was livid. I told her if it was me doing that, she probably would have divorced me. She claimed she wouldn't, but would wonder why I was talking to other women. I flat out asked her, where did you meet these men? She hesitated. I told her to answer me. She said Tinder. I said Tinder, really? After she said that, I walked away from her and went into the living room. She followed me screaming, I am sorry. I am sorry. I told her that we probably need to separate. She started crying. Please don't say that. I told her you flat out lied to me. I asked you to please stop talking to this guy and you end up talking to another guy. We go back and forth. At this point, my initial thought process was to contact an attorney to see what my options were. I slept on the couch. She would come in the living room a couple of times to get me to come to bed, but I declined. The next morning, I got up, showered, and went to work. I did not say anything to my wife. After work, I went straight to an attorney's office. This is when he told me that the best thing for me to do is give my wife a choice of whether she wants our marriage. The attorney made it very clear beforehand that divorces are never simple. They are messy, and there is no way around getting ugly for both parties involved. When he brought up mediation, though, everything seemed like it would be okay. After that point, he said, mediation seems to work for some divorce cases, not all the time though, and he also said that her talking to other men is usually not strong enough to grant the divorce. You will need to provide proof of an affair. I asked him what about irreconcilable differences. He said when someone files for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, they are filing for a no-fault divorce, meaning neither spouse seeks to prove a wrongdoing that caused the end of the marriage. That's different than your situation. He says if you want to divorce her based on her cheating on you, you will need to get proof, and that will also help your case and also probably stop her from trying to get spousal support from you. I thank the attorney for his advice and the free consultation he gave. After leaving the attorney's office, I head home and noticed that my wife has texted me a few times asking where I am. I sent her a text back letting her know I was on my way home. I had to finish a project at work when I got home. She was all over me. It was surprising to see her act that way. It was fun. But in the back of my mind, I am thinking, what is she up to? After we had some fun, she apologizes for talking to the other guys, and she will do everything to regain my trust. She reiterated everything in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, how long will this last? So as the weeks go by, I don't see her on her phone as much, and I thought maybe she was really trying to regain my trust and wanting to work on the marriage, until one day I got home earlier than she did. She sent me a text earlier in the day saying she was working late, so being the good husband that I am, I wanted to surprise her and make dinner. I am in the kitchen making her favorite dish when I went to throw a jar in the trash and noticed there was a ripped up phone box from Straight Talk. It looks like she tried to hide it, or maybe she forgot to, but she didn't do a good job after that. I stopped making dinner and threw everything away. Well, needless to say, I was really upset. This woman doesn't want to be married to me, so I kept my cool and started to think, what do I need to do next? I wasn't going to let her know that I knew she had another phone. At about 11 p.m. my wife came home and I was on the couch. I had dozed off. I had to play it cool. The next morning after getting to work, I decided to call a couple of private investigators and inquire about their services. At this point, I am trying to find out as much as I can remember. She works at a fast food restaurant and she doesn't make anywhere near the amount of money I make, so I don't want to pay spousal support after work. I had a chance to talk to a private investigator in depth. I told him why I needed his services and he told me what he could do, so we agreed to meet later in the week. But in the last week or so, my wife has called me a couple of times letting me know she would be working late, which was uncommon, but at this time I didn't care. I had planned to hire the private investigator to see what she was up to. The next day, I meet with the private investigator, gave him a picture of her and what kind of car she drives and where she works. The first day of his surveillance, he catches her kissing a guy at her job. Now this day she told me she was working late, but she got off work 3 hours early and went to a hotel with this guy. Now mind you, this is guy number 1. She came home and tried to be intimate with me. I declined, telling her I didn't feel well, so the next day she told me she was scheduled to work the 3 to 11 shift. That's the information I gave to the private investigator. My private investigator goes to her job and waits for her. That day he sees her pull into the parking lot of her job, but she never got out of her car until a red Mustang pulls up beside her. She gets out and gets in this guy's car. He follows them to a hotel where they stay in there for 3 hours. They leave the hotel and go to a restaurant for about an hour and a half. They leave the restaurant and go back to the hotel until about 10:30 p.m. That's when they leave the hotel again, go back to her job. She gets out of the Mustang, walks over and kisses the driver, gets into her car, changes into her work clothes, and drives home. When my wife gets home, I pretend to be asleep. The next day, the private investigator says he will come to my job and give me the footage. I was surprised at that because I didn't ask for the footage yet, but I agreed. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop nearby. When we meet, he shows me everything and even has an SD card for me to give to my attorney. I asked him why he was giving me the footage. He said he doesn't need to continue. He says your wife is cheating. That should be enough to get your divorce. He also showed me footage where she saw 3 other men, but she just met those men at her job. She kissed 2 of them. He says his wife of 22 years cheated on him and he had to do the same thing. She was trying to take him to the cleaners, but he kept his cool, did his research, and didn't have to give her a dime. He advised me to get out of the house without her knowing. I left because once she finds out that you caught her, she might try to have you arrested for something stupid. He advises me to take the footage to my attorney and get this process started, but in the meantime, get out of the house. I didn't care about the house, it wasn't ours anyway. But we had planned on buying a house once the pandemic slowed, so I call a really good friend of mine who I have known since high school. I told him everything that's happened, even hiring the private investigator. He was shocked. I told him the private investigator advised me to get out of the house. He immediately said I can come crash at his place. I told him I need to move out as quickly as possible. He says, you know, I have a truck. He then says I can have you out of your place in a few hours while she is at work over the next few days. I discreetly packed some things without my wife knowing. We fooled around a few times, but she had no idea. I was planning to leave her that night. She sent me a text saying she was working late again. I called my friend and made a plan to move out that night. So after work, I go by my divorce attorney's office, drop off the footage, and told him to go ahead and file the divorce paperwork. So I rush home. My friend shows up about 20 minutes later. And we start packing my things. I only have clothes in my computer laptop and a TV that's in the garage. I plan to get a storage unit and store some of the things I am not readily using at the moment. At about 10 p.m. we finish and drive off. When we get up the street, I noticed that my wife just made a turn on our street. I thought to myself, perfect timing. 15 minutes later, my phone is ringing off the hook. I sent it to voicemail. She must have called about 20 times inside of 2 minutes. So the next day I wake up and check my phone. She sent 31 text messages and left 5 voicemails. I didn't respond to either one. When I get to work, my boss calls me in his office and asks what is going on because my wife has been calling and calling. I flat out told my boss my wife was cheating on me. I hired a private investigator to get my proof. I moved out of the house without her knowing it. And now I am divorcing her. He raises his eyebrows and says, wow. Okay, then I told my boss, sorry for all of the phone calls. He says, don't worry about it, just take care of what you need to. Well, as the day goes on, the phone calls at my job and my phone have become less and less. Then I get a strange phone call from my neighbor complaining that we are making too much noise at night after 10 p.m. I told my neighbor that I haven't been home in 3 days. She says, oh, I didn't know. I told her my wife and I are separated. She said she was sorry to hear that, and she noticed a couple of guys over the last couple of days going to our house after 10 p.m. I apologized to her for that, but there was nothing I could do. I wasn't going to contact my wife because I did not want to. 2 weeks goes by. My divorce attorney calls me and says that my wife has been served with divorce papers. I would imagine my phone would blow up that day, but it didn't. 3 weeks later, my divorce hearing is here. I got to the courthouse early. I drove my friend's truck. I didn't take my car. I wanted to see if she would show up, and yes, she did. She had a briefcase, which I thought was really surprising. Boy, she was in for a surprise. I get out of the truck, walk toward the courthouse, find out what courtroom we were in. Well, I walk into the courtroom. She turns around and glances at me and turns back around. I walk over to my table and my attorney is already there. The judge comes out and asks, are we ready to proceed? To make a long story short, she asked for spousal support and told the judge that I was mentally and physically abusive. But the most amazing part of her story, she couldn't provide proof that I was well. My attorney buried her. The judge showed her all the proof of her infidelity. She was shocked. He denied her request for spousal support. She tried to ask for $2,000 per month. The judge granted me the divorce. After that, I never saw her again. About 2 months after the divorce, her cousin, the one who introduced us way back when, said that she was getting evicted and already had her car repossessed. Well, I don't wish bad luck on anyone, but she brought that on herself. Thanks to everyone who saw through her when I didn't. I had to spend money to get confirmation. In the long run, I will save money by not paying spousal support and getting on with my life.